I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Hey everyone, this is Alice. Welcome back. I am joined, as always, by the exacting Brett.
Exacting. See, I feel like exacting sounds like a stickler for things that don't matter.
I'm just going to leave it there.
Well, whatever, Alice. We're all about precision here on Legal Briefs.
Brett, it's so great to flip this because now you have to think of something to respond to these wonderful words. But so far, because we're still new on Legal Briefs, I don't yet have the help of fans to name you. So this is the call to action, everyone. I, too, now need amazing words to describe my wonderful co-host, Brett.
And they really need to be different ones from the ones I'm using. So we're stretching our resources here.
Maybe the goal is that we use up all words within like all of the languages. We'll start with English. We'll venture into, I'm going to count Australian, words and English terms, like literally from England, different terms. And then we'll really venture into Mandarin. Why not?
There you go.
Yeah.
As our listeners may or may not know, in addition to many of your talents, you also are fluent in Mandarin. So
I don't know if that's a talent. It's just like my life.
Well, I can't speak Mandarin, so I'm going to call it a talent.
Well, let me give a quick shout out because I spoke to a group of wonderful young ladies today at the Girls State Conference, and there were hundreds of young women who are on the cusp of everything. I think they're about to be seniors and freshmen in college, and several of them had heard of our podcast, and they had the nicest things to say, and I felt so relevant that teenagers knew who we were, Brett.
Yes, exactly. That's awesome. I wish I'd been there to hear it.
And here we are being relevant. Here we are being relevant in cutting news. Welcome back to Legal Briefs, everyone. We have an awesome show for you today. I have 2 words for you, Brett. Just 2 words. Lawyer dog.
Lawyer dog. Lawyer dog. This is not really that cutting edge because it's from 2017, but I only recently learned about it. So in my mind, this is like new stuff. And we have Allison, the host of Ding Dong Darkness Time. If you're not listening to Ding Dong Darkness Time, you are missing out. So check it out. Who brought this to our attention. And some of you may be familiar with Lawyer Dog that we're talking about. And it's not actually a lawyer who is a dog, though that would be really cool. It is from a 2017 story in the true crime section of the Washington Post. And here is the headline for this case. The suspect told police, "Give me a lawyer dog." The court says he wasn't asking for a lawyer.
Okay, Brett, this is too good. This is too good. You have to let me tell this story. This is just insane because I think we face this actually a lot in our practice. So to read about it in this Washington Post article made me chuckle because I can absolutely see how these events unfolded. So the story begins, when a friend says, "I'll hit you up later, dog," he is stating that he will call again sometime. He is not calling the person a, quote, later dog. But that's not how the courts in Louisiana see it. And when a suspect in an interrogation told detectives to, quote, "Just give me a lawyer, dog," the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled that the suspect was in fact asking for a, quote, lawyer dog, and not invoking his constitutional right to counsel.
Alice, it's a story so good and so hilarious that it has to be false. And you would think if you were the Washington Post, you might look just a little deeper into the story. Maybe when you hear someone say that the court said they were actually asking for, I guess, a dog trained in the law, that you might take a moment to ask yourself, is that really what the Supreme Court of Louisiana said? Or could there be something else going on? And I guess this is yet another example of a misleading headline that we, the Coldwater prosecutors, both here and in our other show, are going to have to debunk.
Oh, I love debunking with you, Brett. It's so much fun because as much as I want this article to be true, even as I was reading you how the article began, I couldn't help but laugh because there's no way this is true. And in fact, Brett, is it true?
No, it is not true.
No, in fact, it's not true. But let's talk about the case and what it entails because guess what? Context matters. And also reading the rules, reading the opinion matters. So tell us about the defendant, Brett.
So the defendant in this case is named Warren Demesme, and he, not a nice guy, is accused of raping two juveniles. So he's arrested, he's taken into interrogation, and the way this goes, if you're arrested, everybody knows this. If you're arrested by the police, you get your Miranda warnings. And your Miranda warnings basically tell you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford your attorney, one will be provided for you at no expense. But at that point, the police are always going to ask, having said that, now that you know your rights, do you want to talk to me? And most times, people will say yes, they want to talk. And look, there's plenty of people who will tell you that is always the wrong answer. We were on Bob Ruff's show once, and Bob's position is never talk to the police. I think he's probably overstating it just a little bit. I think there are times you can talk to the police and it might save you some hassle. But usually if the police arrest you and bring you in, they think you did it and they're looking for evidence. And talking to them without the benefit of a lawyer, maybe not smart. But old Warren, he decides he's going to talk to the police. So this interrogation goes on for a little while, and the police are saying, look, we think you did this. Just fess up to what you did. We think you did this. And this is what Warren actually says. This is how I feel. If y'all think I did it, I know that I didn't do it. So why don't you just give me a lawyer, dog? Because this is not what's up.
Very different than asking for a lawyer, dog.
Yes. Very different from asking for a lawyer, dog. And here's the thing, right? The Washington Post wants to set this up with this clickbait headline. They were one of many, many, many people who did that. And to say this court ruled that statement is asking for a lawyer dog, not a lawyer. And therefore, since you were asking for a lawyer dog, the police can continue to interrogate you because you didn't ask for a lawyer. You asked for a lawyer dog, and we know lawyer dogs don't exist. So therefore, you did not invoke your right to a lawyer. That is what they want you to think this court said, because that is both hilarious on the one hand and also really unjust on the other. It just feels like, mean old court railroads this guy because they interpret this in this crazy way.
But Brett, it is pernicious because it feeds into kind of this idea that the courts are out to get you on technicalities and the court doesn't have any common sense and it doesn't make sense to the lay person. And so I do think, like, while it's funny and it is clickbait, it kind of goes to a deeper issue of sowing mistrust and a general malcontent with the judicial system, which I think is dangerous because when we don't understand what these opinions are saying or they're misconstrued, that's where you get people saying, I don't trust the court no matter what. The court is going to turn my words around. And when I say lawyer, they'll say it says something else. So I also warn you guys on that because I think it's very important to know what is behind these headlines and whether you should believe them in the first instance. Because, like Brett said, this is totally false.
And look, we talked about this last week. We talked about Martinez, the Supreme Court case. And after that opinion came out, you had all these people who went to the most extreme view possible. They told people that opinion basically gutted, in their words, the ability for defendants to raise defenses in a habeas case. And they said things like, the Supreme Court wants innocent people to be executed. And it's just crazy. It was a very minor decision, really entirely consistent with the statute, that really didn't do much of anything. And for those two guys in that case, yeah, there is some avenues that were foreclosed for them. And there will be some people who had some avenues foreclosed, but there are other avenues available for them to seek redress of their rights. And this was a very narrow ruling. It wasn't this extreme, crazy, unjust ruling that people made it out to be. And just the absolute lack of nuance that we have today is really problematic, because it does make you lose all faith. It makes you think we can't have faith in the courts. In that case, it was the United States Supreme Court. In this case, it's the Louisiana Supreme Court. And I guess one thing I would just say to everybody, if you read a headline and it immediately makes you really mad because it seems so unjust, probably the headline is wrong. It's probably either a flat out lie, or it is so divorced from reality that if you actually knew the facts, you would be stunned that that headline would actually get written. And a lot of times, one of the ways it works, you have headline writers and you have story writers. And the story writers are the ones writing the story with the facts. And oftentimes in like paragraph 17, you'll find the real answer. But then you have people who it's their job, particularly in this media environment where clicks matter, to write a headline that will make you want to read the story. And unfortunately, you get things like this, where it's like, lawyer dog, right? This court is saying, oh, he didn't ask for a lawyer, he asked for a lawyer dog. But that's not what happened. And there's a few things you kind of have to understand why that's not what happened. We talked about Miranda. Everybody knows their Miranda rights. The interesting thing about your Miranda rights, they're not in the Constitution. You don't actually have a right in the Constitution to be read your Miranda rights. And even in Miranda, the case, the Supreme Court case that gave us the Miranda rights, that case itself acknowledged that there was no real right to this. So before Miranda, you had the right to remain silent, but the police didn't have to tell you that. And if you started talking, that could all be used against you. In Miranda, the Supreme Court said, we're going to have what they called a prophylactic rule. So we're going to have a rule that's not constitutional, but it's going to protect your actual constitutional rights. So you have a right to remain silent. So we're going to have a rule that says you have to tell people that. We're going to have a rule that says you have to tell people that they get a lawyer. And this made a lot of sense in a lot of ways, but it was also pretty controversial, because what you ended up having is you had this extra constitutional rule that was resulting in people who were clearly guilty getting off, because they would talk to the police and a court would say, well, you should have told them they didn't have to talk to you. So we're throwing that out, and now this person who murdered someone or did something is going to get off. And there was this case called Dickinson that came out 20, 30 years later, where the court said basically Miranda was wrong. It was wrongly decided, should never have done that, but it's become such a part of the fabric of the culture and the law that we can't get rid of it now. So they just kept it. It's kind of a weird opinion. It's an interesting opinion to read, because it's all about sort of this was a wrongly decided case, but for all these reasons, and there's reasons the court looks to when it's deciding whether or not to overturn a precedent. For all these reasons, we're just going to leave it, because everybody knows their Miranda rights, right? But exclusion is disfavored for obvious reasons. The exclusionary rule is also a prophylactic rule. So there's nothing in the Constitution that says if your rights are violated, the evidence you get as a result can't be used. The courts have said that's how we're going to enforce it. So we're going to enforce your Fourth Amendment rights against illegal search and seizure, or your right not to incriminate yourself, by saying if the police violate those rights, the remedy is the evidence can't be used. But that's a harsh rule, because, once again, it leads to people who are guilty and for whom there is evidence of their guilt, nevertheless being acquitted. So the courts have always said this is very narrow, and we're only going to apply it in narrow ways. And that brings us to this question of, what does it mean to ask for a lawyer?
And, in fact, just like Brett kind of gave you a quick and dirty, that was amazing. All of you taking the bar, all of you wanting a legal education, you just learned about 3 major rules in the law and how they came to be from Brett. But the Louisiana Supreme Court relied on another well-established rule, and that is in order to invoke the right to counsel, one must do it unequivocally. So we talked about how your Miranda rights. You don't have to speak. Everything you say can and will be used against you, that whole thing. You have a right to counsel. All of that is there. But at the same time, there is a well-established rule that you have to say, I want a lawyer. You can say you want a lawyer, but then keep talking, and that's fine as well. And the whole point is the way people talk, we often talk not very clearly. And the courts have said that the interrogating officers don't have to read between the lines. They have to know without a doubt that you are asking for counsel. So the use of the word dog is not what's important here at all. What's important is that the request made by Warren was phrased in the conditional. Listen again to what he said. He didn't say, give me a lawyer, dog. Rather, he said the conditional. He said, quote, this is how I feel. If y'all think I did it, I know that I didn't do it, so why don't you just give me a lawyer, dog? Because that is not what's up. That's the conditional. It is not asking for an attorney. So unless the defendant says without equivocation that he wants a lawyer, the police were well within their rights to continue interrogating him. So now you can see why the headline of lawyer dog does not equate lawyer is completely misleading. The word dog had nothing to do with the Louisiana Supreme Court's ruling at all. You can take the word dog out. It is about the unequivocal assertion of your right to counsel, and which he did not do here.
And this is usually we save the CLE for the end, but the one for today is, if you want a lawyer, say, I want a lawyer. Don't put if you're going to say that, I want a lawyer, you did not invoke your right to lawyer. You have to say it without equivocation, without a condition precedent that you want a lawyer. It has to be that clear. And if it's not, then you didn't invoke, and the police can continue to interrogate you.
Indeed. So that was a really funny article. Thank you, Allison, for pointing it out to us. But again, clickbait and not the real thing. So here we are being Coldwater prosecutors day and night across 2 podcasts now.
I think this podcast is basically going to be just endless cold water. So.
For those of you who are new and haven't heard that term, we called ourselves the cold water. Actually, others called us the cold water prosecutors because we poured cold water on all the sexiest theories in our other podcast, The Prosecutors, because we try to just get to what the law actually says and what the evidence shows. So with that, Brett, Damien Hurd. We did a 3-part series on Damien in the last couple of months, and you heard what we concluded. We won't give it away here. Go ahead and listen to those 3 if you haven't yet, but we've received an email from Jessica, and it is one of the most powerful, insightful emails we've ever received it. We're not going to read it all, but I do think it's really important to share with all of you, and we cleared it with her first. And it's a perspective that we simply don't have. As you heard in the Damien Hurd episodes, we ended the last episode with a discussion about mental illness and about suicide. And here Jessica just gives an amazing perspective on things that we'd like to share with you.
So here's what she says. I truly never thought I'd sit down and write into a podcast, but your first episode on Damien Hurd made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up with how eerily similar his life was to mine, and I felt compared to share. I was a college athlete like Damien. Also like Damien, I was a freshman during the 2013-14 school year and competed in a sport that was also inherently individual. I battled an injury my freshman year, just like Damien. On the outside, I was also the happiest kid ever. I was outgoing, a decent student, fun-loving, and had tons of friends. I had a part-time job. I thought about the future all the time, and I genuinely loved life. But I was also clinically depressed. I think one thing that people talking about Damien in 2021, 22 are missing is that even though 2014 wasn't that long ago, it was kind of like a different generation in terms of being open about mental health. People talk freely about going to therapy and taking medication today, but that just wasn't the case when I was a college freshman. Mental health was heavily stigmatized. I'd argue, although with only anecdotal evidence and my own experience to support, that it was even more stigmatized among athletes' athletic departments, even more so in Damien's particular niche. After all, wrestling is a good old American sport. I will tell you, though, that I don't think any of my friends or family would have even suspected that I was suicidal. To them, I was a partier, a fun loving and friendly girl who was always game for anything. What they didn't know was all that fun loving behavior was actually highly risky behavior in a desperate attempt to feel a sensation other than pain. If I had committed suicide at that time, which was a real possibility, I can unequivocally say that you wouldn't have been able to find a person close to me who would have believed it. So much so that now, a decade later, my dad, who is also my absolute best friend, just like Damien's was his, gets highly uncomfortable because he feels intense guilt that he didn't even have an inkling that I was suffering so badly.
Jessica goes on to say, here's the thing about it though, and here's where the hairs on my neck stood up. There was one person who knew that I had suicidal thoughts. That person wasn't a close friend, an acquaintance though, and that person was a similarly depressed freshman wrestler. It was like I knew that the casualness of our relationship and the 1 degree of separation from my close friends made him a secure person to confide in. Also, alcohol makes for some loose lips, which can explain a person randomly disclosing a deeply personal secret one time and then never again. Damien confiding in Tori, and I'm fairly certain that was her name, sounds like a similar and not very shocking scenario if her interview was credible. Back to my freshman wrestling acquaintance, and something that I personally believe is glaringly aligned to Damien. This person similarly wrestled in a lightweight class and was similarly dominant as a senior in high school. When he arrived at college, he found it extraordinarily difficult to maintain his low weight, and his coach made the decision to move him up a class weight, 8 pounds heavier. He was never dominant again. He started but had a seriously lopsided match record in the losing direction, didn't compete in regionals, and didn't even come close to making the NCAA championship, even though he had had a ridiculously strong record as a high school senior. He was seriously depressed and, like me, covered it up with some heavy partying. He felt alone because the masculine and tough guy attitude of college wrestling didn't really align with supporting a teammate with serious mental health concerns. All the guys knew. It eventually alienated him because it made him, quote, soft. Now, Damien wasn't too far off this guy's story. In 2012-2013, Damien was a high school senior wrestling at 113 pounds. He went 42-0. In high school wrestling, there are 14 weight classes, but college wrestling tightens up and only includes 10 weight classes. So even if you're really good, competition inherently ramps up when you enter the NCAA. The smallest weight class is 125 pounds, and that's where Damien landed. He immediately started wrestling athletes who were up to 11% bigger than his competitors for his Texas state title. Damien's dad and Claire said that Damien wrestled really well his freshman year. Damien wrestled to a 10-12 record. After winning a state title and achieving a 42-0 record his senior year of high school. Dollars to donuts. Someone as competitive as Damien did not consider a 10-12 record with no NCAA qualification as a good season. For me, that's just another factor that might have compounded Damien's mental state.
And this is one of the reasons we always ask for people to reach out to us, because the collective knowledge of people is so amazing. I never would have even thought to look at this because I didn't know how wrestling worked and the weight classes and everything else. But Jessica did, and she recognized what must have been a huge stressor in Damien's life. He had gone from perfection to a really difficult situation where he was struggling and where he was injured. And we talked about in our episodes how much wrestling meant to him. And Jessica goes on in her email. She wrote a very long email to us. And she talks about the mental stress of things like cutting weight, which is something that he would have needed to do to stay in at least the lowest weight class where he would have had more opportunities. The effect of concussions on athletes. And we're learning more and more about how concussions can lead to depression, mental illness. We see that a lot in the NFL. We see athletes who have everything in the world who are succumbing to suicide. And part of that is because of some of the damage that's done from concussions. And she talks about studies about depression in athletes. And in fact, this is a recent focus by the NCAA after a number of college athletes this year died by suicide since January. It's a very concerning thing, and it's something that we just don't pay a lot of attention to because people forget the incredible stress that athletes are under and the pressure that they put on themselves to succeed. So we thought this was just an incredibly insightful email, one that really adds a lot of depth and dimension to this story. And we wanted to share it with you guys because I know most of you who are listening to this podcast also listen to our other podcasts and are very familiar with Damien's story. And as we did in that podcast, I would just encourage anyone who's having thoughts of suicide or mental illness or anything along those lines to reach out to somebody, to talk to somebody. There is help available out there. There's professional help available out there. The National Suicide Prevention Line is 1-800-273-8255. And just remember that how valuable you are and how much people love you, because it is a problem, and it's a problem in our country, and it gets worse and worse every day. And you can look at the statistics and know that. And I think one thing that Jessica points out that I think is a good thing is, unlike maybe as little as 10 years ago, now there's a lot more people talking about this. And look, talking about it doesn't make it go away, but it does, I think, at least make people feel like when they're having these thoughts, they don't have to deal with them by themselves. They can reach out to others.
I had a young woman ask me a very insightful question. She said, "What do I do when I feel like an imposter wherever I go?" And I told her, the truth is, everyone feels like an imposter at some point. And just like we previously mentioned, everyone struggles with things that seem bigger than anything you can bear at times. It's just at different times in our lives, and it matters who is around and who you confide in. But I think knowing that answer, that it affects everyone at some point to some degree, can help some feel less lonely. So we are so thankful for Jessica and all of our listeners really for writing in with insightful emails like the one you just heard from. And please continue to do so. And we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Legal Briefs. We are always here to take your input and your insights on what you want us to cover. It's going to be clickbait articles that are debunked. It's going to be developments in court cases in the law from state, local, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it's also going to include these updates in cases we've covered before that may interest all of you. So it's up to you what these episodes look like.
And I would say, if there are cases that you would like highlighted or things you would like us to talk about that really don't fit into the full episode, and we get that sometimes. People will reach out and say, "I really wish you'd talk about this." And I'll email them back and I'll say, "Hey, point me to some resources, some things that we can talk about." And they're like, "Well, there's really not anything." And that's a problem because since we're not an investigative podcast, we don't have the ability to go out there on the ground and interview people and drum up that kind of stuff. We just don't have the ability to do that. It's really hard to do an hour-long episode when there's really nothing to talk about. But this format gives us a lot more flexibility to talk about things for a few minutes. We can highlight a case, that where there's not a whole lot out there. We can highlight it. We can bring it to people's attention, ask if people have any information, give them the tip line, anything like that. That's something we can do in 5 or 10 minutes that we can't do on our regular episode. So I hope you guys will reach out. Y'all know how to get in touch with us, but we'll share it anyways. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those. Prosecutorspodcast.com is our website. If you're on Patreon, you're getting these episodes ad-free. You can always shoot us a message there. So I hope you guys will be in touch. And I hope if there are things you want us to cover or if there are questions you want us to dig into, you will let us know.
Well, Brett, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. Just like I said, be kind to each other. You never know what people are going through. You never know when a kind word can mean all the difference in the world. So take care of each other out there. You guys are great. We love y'all. Love talking to y'all about these cases. And like I said, just take care of each other.
Indeed. Thank you guys for taking care of us, and we hope to do the same for you. Until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Glad you remembered this time. What? Testing.
Thank you for that dig. Oh, I didn't get to call you a bodacious brat.
You didn't. You just went right into it.
Okay,
you were totally focused.
No,
These people who complain about chit chat, you were like, boom, we're going right into it. We're not even going to do no chit chat. None.